Herstoryans, and welcome to another episode of Herstory Reacts. Today we are going to be reacting to Season 6, Part 1 of The Crown. Now, as you can see from my script here, we have a deep dive ahead of us. So if you are looking for a very quick 10 things The Crown got wrong in Season 6, Part 1, this is not the video for you. I go episode by episode. I talk about what happened in that episode, and I talk about whether those things actually happened or not, and I do lots of research. So this is deep dive content, and if that's not for you, then that's cool. I will see you on another of my shorter videos, but for those who are here for the deep dive content, let's get started, shall we? So let's go straight in with episode 1, Persona non grata. Paris, 1997, and a Chad Kroeger lookalike takes his dog for a nighttime pee. A car comes careening past and smashes under the Pont d'Alma, and he calls emergency services. Roll the latest new fancy title screen / intro, and I swear it has an outline of the Mond and Cross of St Mary's crown right at the end. It might be Charles's, the Mond and Cross of Charles's crown to symbolise the new monarch. That would make far more sense. But it really looks like the crown Camilla wore. And if so, a very subtle dig at Camilla, a nod to the change of ruler. I'm not entirely sure, but I did think, I know that crown, and I can't place it, and it's annoying me because it's quite blurred. So I can't actually, when I compare it to the two, I'm like, oh, damn. Anyway, brief aside. So Diana and Will are jamming in the car on the way to meet Prime Minister Tony Blair at Chequers. They arrive, they play football, have lunch, and then they go for a walk. Blair recollects this to Liz, Queen Elizabeth, or Liz as we affectionately call her here in the UK, God rest her soul. Blair recollects this to Liz and says Diana would like a more active role in governance, and that when the world talks, Diana listens. Liz says Diana needs to learn the difference between being in and out of governance, because at this point she is mid-divorce with Charles, or has divorced Charles by this point. Diana wakes Will up at Chequers in the morning to a helicopter from Mumu, which is Mohammed Al Fayed, which then takes them to a private jet where Harry appears completely out of thin air, but okay. And they're off on holiday for 10 days to swerve Camilla's 50th birthday party. So, unfortunately, on this very, very first fact-checking exercise, the details are murky at best, I'm afraid to tell you. Tony Blair's story has changed more times than is fathomable at this point, and I'm not entirely sure why, so let's go through it. Diana did visit Tony and Cherie Blair with William at Chequers on the 6th of July 1997, and the kids did play football, so Tony's kids and William all played football together. I think it's really unlikely that Blair would have lobbied Liz for any kind of more public role for Diana, because he'd only been elected in May and we're talking about July, and she was really, really fond of his predecessor John Major, and she made that quite clear to Tony Blair on their first meeting. So yes, he came in New Labour ready to ruffle feathers, but I don't know if he was ready to stick his oar in that far. So what did they discuss? Blair has contradicted himself on this so much, so it's really, really tough to say. He wrote in his biography that their conversation was tense after he voiced concerns about her relationship with Dodie. But Diana didn't go to Saint-Tropez until the 11th of July. So the math ain't mathing Tony, because she visits on the 6th and then she goes to Saint-Tropez on the 11th, and then the photos don't get leaked until she's in Saint-Tropez. So unless he had some massively early scoop, which I doubt. I don't believe him. I'm sorry. Allegedly. I don't believe him. I don't believe him at all. So you have the Swan Lake gala and the meal with Dodie and Heine on the 3rd of July. The meeting with Blair on the 6th. Saint-Tropez on the 11th. Dodie arrives a few days later. It's just not stacking up. It's not stacking up. It was also said that Diana was annoyed with Blair because he'd pushed the meeting back from June into July. He pushed it back so that he could meet with Charles first. He says the pair walked around the grounds on a beautiful day and recounted a frosty exchange where he said that Dodie made him feel uneasy and he thought he was a problem. However, The Independent newspaper says, following Diana's death, Downing Street confirmed that Diana visited Blair at Chequers with her son a few weeks before, where they discussed a special role for her as an overseas ambassador. And I'm inclined to believe them, actually. Because I don't think he would have known about Dodie at that point. And if you know anything about Tony Blair, he's quite good at telling lies. All comes out later. Kind of went to war with Iraq over a bit of a lie. That was bad, that was. But anyway, I digress. Diana told a journalist at the time that the Prime Minister had recognised her skills and asked her to undertake missions abroad for Britain. Blair later backtracked on the whole Dodie thing and said his wife Cherie simply invited Diana over for lunch, probably because he realised that the math wasn't mathing. I think Mr. Blair was playing both sides. I think he was sweet-talking Charles and Liz, and he was also sweet-talking Diana. That's what I think was going on here. That is, you know, I'm a historian, and I like to reference, and I like everything to be based in fact, but usually history is up to our interpretation based on our opinion and our perception and our best guess based on the evidence we have. And based on the evidence we have, I think Tony was being a little bit of a double agent, and I'm sticking with it. As for William and Diana jamming in the car, driving down country lanes in her BMW blaring Enya, Harry later recalled that those are some of the fondest memories he holds of his mum. So that's absolutely true. He said his favourite moments of his mum were times where she was able to carve out moments of normalcy, where they weren't being followed, where they weren't being bothered, and it's the simple things that he remembers, like driving down country lanes, blasting music. Like, he remembers those things really fondly. So it's actually Harry's memory, but they've, you know, Will would have experienced it too. And then we are at Highgrove with Charles and Camilla. The only member of the royal family that's RSVP'd to Camilla's birthday party is Princess Margaret. The Queen's reply seems to have been lost in the post. Mohammed calls Dodie, who is picking fabrics for his Malibu house and preparing to wed Kelly in 3 weeks' time. Mohammed summons Dodie to Saint-Tropez and orders him to leave Madame Bikini behind. Mohammed and Heine welcome Diana and the boys to Saint-Tropez. Charles visits Liz to get her RSVP in person, and she's afraid she has to go to the Rolls-Royce factory and it simply can't be changed, so soz. She doesn't approve of Charles and Camilla and refuses to attend as a matter of principle. Bolland, who is Charles and Camilla's spin doctor PR person, says not to worry. The Mirror are going to print a poll saying that 2/3 of voters say that Camilla should be allowed to marry Charles and that Diana has sullied her reputation with the Panorama interview. So they are divorced by this point. Just trying to catch myself up. It's been a while since I watched this. I can't find this poll, and I very much doubt the British public would have voted that way. I really, really do. I don't believe it for a second. If you can find it, please send me a link, hit me up on Instagram, prove me wrong. I'd love to see it. If you can find it, I'd love to see it. People were pissed when Charles and Camilla got married in 2005, let alone having a positive opinion towards Camilla in 1997. A lot of people were pissed when Camilla became queen, even at the coronation, and I'd say by this point she's probably put her time in. But that's just my personal opinion. Camilla is a very divisive figure still in the UK, and I find it very difficult to believe that that poll existed, or if it did exist, I find it very hard to believe that it was real, or perhaps it was a select sample of people that voted that way. Did Charles go and visit his mum? No idea. But Charles reportedly did not chase his mother's approval on the whole Camilla subject. Liz didn't like Camilla, and despite later on in the show Liz will say to Philip that Camilla isn't wicked, Liz actually did once refer to Camilla as that wicked woman to Charles's face. So the show is making Liz softer than she was at that point in time. The pair of them, of course, did grow closer over time, and by the time Liz passed away, it was her wish that Camilla be named Queen Consort, so they got there in the end. But at this particular point in time that we are referring to, 1997, Liz is not impressed with the whole Camilla business. The paparazzi swarm Diana and the boys in Saint-Tropez as Dodi pulls up at Mohammed's house. Mohammed drops him right into meeting and looking after Diana, saying Dodi should be grateful for him putting Diana on a plate for him, and that this is his chance to make his father proud. Kelly calls Dodi because she's caught wind of Diana being in Saint-Tropez from the papers, and she wants to join them. Dodi reluctantly agrees. Now, we covered Dodi and Kelly and their breakup extensively in season 5 part 2, so if you want to hear about everything that happens on the boat and everything that goes on and how she finds out and sues him and everything like that, go back and watch that. I will touch on it briefly here, but we've already gone into it in a bit of depth, so I won't go back over it. Go watch season 5 part 2 if you want the full breakdown. But it was horrible. Kelly found out about Dodi and Diana via the kiss pictures in the paper, just like everybody else, and she was kept in a smaller yacht offshore. She was treated pretty appallingly, and she did sue for breach of contract. The Paps are freaking out the boys, Harry and William, so Diana takes a boat to them, bargaining that if they go away, she'll give them a big surprise with the next thing she does. She poses for photos in her leopard print swimming costume. Diana did approach the Paps on their boat and asked them to sling their hook. In fact, reportedly on the 14th of July, reporters and photographers were moored near Mohammed's yacht, the Yonikal, when Diana surprised the group, addressing them from her motorboat in that leopard print swimming suit. She told them Will was really freaked out and she felt abused and followed wherever she went. According to Sally Bedell-Smith, who's a royal biographer, the big surprise Diana hinted at was that she was thinking of living abroad. So it wasn't like, I'm getting married, I'm pregnant, I'm going to die in a horrific car accident. It was, she was thinking of moving abroad, as Sally Bedell-Smith says. This meeting with the paparazzi did not take place on Camilla's birthday. That was 3 days later, on the 17th of July, where Charles did throw a party at Highgrove. But for artistic license. Back to the show, and Paps also swarmed the gates of Highgrove as Camilla arrives for her party. Charles gives a speech over dinner about how much he adores her, and he reads an excerpt from Persuasion, Captain Wentworth's letter. Margaret reports back to Liz how happy and himself Charles seems, and Liz should start showing some support now. Philip says it's still a no from him. This whole party/speech thing is weird and a pure fabrication. So let's dissect it. Margaret did not attend for a start. Like, she wasn't there. None of the royal family attended. That wasn't a thing. Charles didn't make a speech. The press were not invited. Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son, did give a very small speech thanking Charles for throwing the party. And Camilla did wear black. And she did have a very laid-back attitude about the Queen coming round in her own time. Those things are true. But Captain Wentworth's letter? Nay. Just didn't happen. Charles is fuming at the front page of the Mirror. We have Diana in Saint-Tropez trumping Camilla yet again as Kelly arrives in Saint-Tropez. She actually arrived around the 14th to the 16th of March, so... and is upset when she isn't allowed on the yacht the Yonical and is taken to a smaller boat to be sequestered, where Dodie then visits her. True. Dodie confides in Diana about the whole situation, and they talk about the expectations of fathers while Diana plays piano and laments how little her dad cared for her. I don't know too much about Diana's relationship with her father, but I do know her mother left the family when she was very, very young, so she did have a very fractured childhood. Everybody watches Jumanji on the last evening. Classic film. Absolutely brilliant. Still love it to this day. As Diana and Dodie exchange glances, Liz calls Charles to say she's happy that he's happy. Dodie bids Diana farewell, and upon hearing she'll be gone for the summer as the boys are going back to Balmoral, she says she won't be joining as she's very much persona non grata. Dodie says she's welcome back there in Saint-Tropez anytime. Diana returns home to Kensington Palace to a room full of roses, a watch, and a note that says, Paris next week? Diana and the boys returned from Saint-Tropez on the 20th of July, and at Kensington Palace was indeed waiting for her an $11,000 Cartier Panther watch, an apartment full of roses, and a week later, Diana returned to Saint-Tropez alone to see Dodie while the boys were at Balmoral. Episode 2, 2 photographs. Meet Mario Brenner, photographer. He gives an interview surrounded by images he's taken of Madonna, Angelina Jolie, Tom Cruise, etc., etc., explaining why he's turned away from celeb portraiture to being a paparazzi and how he became the best. Cut to Duncan Muir, another photographer. In sharp contrast, he lives in quiet Scotland, a family man that does wedding and family portraits, and occasionally also does photos of the royal family, following the Queen wherever she goes to pap her. He says he loves her due to her ability to unite a divided nation in their admiration of her, and will miss her terribly when she's gone. And they put that quote in just to make me a little bit teary, I think. I swear. Wicked of them. Got no business doing that. Then we have a family/privy council/firm meeting. I'm not entirely sure. The new royal website is loaded up for them to see via dial-up internet, and it loads way too fast. Anyone that was around back then knows it loads way too fast. It would have taken about 15 minutes to do that in real time, but I'll allow them it for the purposes of the show. Charles and Anne are acknowledged for becoming patrons of various charities, royal colleges and museums, and then Diana is raised. and the subject that once she returned the boys to Balmoral, she then went to Paris with Dodi, and there are fears that if they're in a relationship, it would legitimise Mohammed's right to British citizenship, which he did try and apply for twice but was denied, and he blamed it on racism, pure and simple. That's a direct quote. Cut to Dodi and Diana on the Yonical, now rather physically closer than last we saw. The maid on board confirms to Mohammed over the phone that the pair are sharing one room and one bed. Mohammed orders the best paparazzi in the Mediterranean to be dispatched. Cue Mario Brenner boarding a plane. Mohammed's biographer Tony Bauer says that Mohammed was calling the Yonical to check on the couple hourly, and that Diana would joke to Dodi that God was calling again. The pair reportedly requested greater security from Mohammed due to paparazzi intrusion, which he refused. Following Mohammed's death earlier this year, Bauer recalled in the Times newspaper how Mohammed gleefully showed him the pictures of Dodi and Diana and allegedly revealed how he had rapidly bought a yacht suitable for his son's seduction of her. Mohammed always maintained until his death that the two were engaged, star-crossed lovers, murdered by the establishment because of racism, and memorialised the two of them together in his grief in arguably very tacky ways, but we'll get to that. Dodi says he's going to tell Kelly the wedding's off, while Diana flies to Bosnia to do her landmine charity work. They talk about the Landmine Survivors Network run by Ken Rutherford, who drew her attention to the dreadful damage they do to those who survive as well as those they kill. Diana's landmine work is outstanding, and it's not given enough credit in the series, so I'm going to talk about it later because she deserves her flowers for it, so we're going to give them to her. Brenner snaps away as the pair kiss. I don't know what this is. Is this kissing or snapping? I don't know. Brenner snaps away as the pair kiss, and Mohammed welcomes Casanova home. At the palace, Fellows receives a phone call. As the boys and Diana are reunited, they snuggle and play board games. Dodi calls to give her the heads up. The Mirror have bought the pictures for £250,000. This is back in 1997. £250,000, with Fellows describing it as the fiercest bidding war in Fleet Street history. Fleet Street, I don't know if it still is. I presume it still is, but it was always the street where all the newspapers were printed in London. So that's the Fleet Street reference. And the Sun and the Daily Mail also paid £100,000 apiece for the right to reproduce the images. All of those figures are correct. Mario Brenner has something to say about this whole thing, though. He told the New York Times via email that the show's depiction of how he captured Diana and Dodi is absurd and completely invented. Brenner claims he used to spend every summer in Sardinia, where the Yonical was moored, and he simply came across the pair in a great stroke of luck. Per his account, Brenner approached the Yonical on the 1st of August thinking that Diana was an acquaintance of his before actually realising who she was, and then he worked tirelessly over the next few days to get the historic photo, eventually scaling a cliff about 400 metres from the yacht to get the best angle. With the help of an agent, he then sold the pictures for £1.7 million in total. After the pictures hit the Sunday Mirror, more than 200 photographers flooded Sardinia in the hope of catching similar shots. Brenner said he wept when the pair died, and the idea that his photos could have contributed to fueling the hunt for Diana and Dodi obviously saddens me, but that, if it hadn't been me, someone else would certainly have captured those images. My heart bleeds for him. Diana and Charles exchange the boys, and Charles says he's proud of Diana's work in Bosnia, and although they weren't brilliant at married, he'd like to be brilliant co-parents. Diana agrees they'll be brilliant at divorce, and Charles gives her a peck on the cheek. Diana, knowing the whole time that the kiss photos are about to drop and destroy this very sweet promise. Dodie sends Diana a satellite phone so they can discuss developments without listening ears, which is plausible given that Kensington Palace wiretaps from last season. Then Diana is off to Bosnia, where she meets the mayor, Mr. Begovic. She walks around the village, high-fiving kids, chatting to survivors, and being hands-on and devoted to all the victims and survivors that she encounters, strapping on a vest, walking through minefields as Liz reads the 11-page spread on the kiss. This landmine trip to Bosnia did happen, and here are some pictures from Diana's trip and her comforting the people she met. However, the infamous landmine walk actually happened in Angola. It was on the 15th of January 1997, so 6 months before the events that are being depicted in The Crown, working with the Halo Trust. So they've kind of mashed these events together. And as I said, we'll talk about the incredible work that Diana did properly later, because she deserves it. Liz, William and Charles all read the coverage on the kiss with disappointment at Balmoral. And now the paparazzi know that pictures can sell for so much money, they will hound Diana even more. Diana gives a press conference on landmines as the photos of the kiss drop, and then that's all the reporters care about, asking inappropriate questions. I looked into this, and I don't think the news dropped during the actual press conference. The photos were published on the 10th of August, which is the day that Diana arrives in Sarajevo, in Bosnia. It seems that she was actually in a cemetery consoling victims' families when she learned about the photos being published, and she was privately very upset that the interest in her private life was derailing the attention that she was trying to bring to the causes that were close to her heart, and that's very understandable. I think the press conference was probably just to add a little bit of drama and up the stakes and the pressure, but in reality she's trying to console people that have lost people to landmines, and her private life is just all anyone cares about. Bolland informs Charles that Kelly is suing Dodie for breach of contract, true, and suggests releasing a counter photo of Charles and the boys, a broadsheet prince to starkly contrast a tabloid princess. Charles reluctantly agrees, and now to find a photographer, and in steps Duncan Muir. This wasn't a choreographed counter photo orchestrated by Bolland, but actually a planned photo shoot that took place on the 14th of August 97 at Polvere on the River Dee on the Balmoral estate, where several royal photographers were allowed to take pictures in exchange for leaving the family in privacy for the rest of their holiday. So the excuse that Bolland says that they're going to give to the boys to get them to comply is that was actually the reason it was done. It wasn't Bolland's thing. The boys' black Labrador Widgeon was in attendance, along with Charles's Jack Russell Trigger. Liz laments to Philip that Diana drove 160 miles in a Harrods helicopter to see a psychic in Derbyshire, and that Diana's behaviour is becoming more and more reckless as she jets off to the south of France again. This trip to a psychic did happen. Diana did have a favourite psychic. Her name was Rita Rogers. They met in 1991, and Diana called Rogers frequently. Rogers said, when she came to visit, she used to throw her arms around me, as depicted in the show. Before Diana met Dodie, she had apparently been told by Rogers that she would meet a man of foreign descent with the initial D on water, and that he would be involved in the film industry. According to Rogers, Diana called her not long afterwards to report that she was on a boat with a man named Dodie. Dodie was so impressed with this that he wanted to see this Rogers lady for himself, which led to them visiting the Derbyshire village of Grassmore in August 1997. It's a shame she didn't tell them that they should avoid Paris for at least the next month. Sorry. I have a dark sense of humour. Diana sits lonely at the end of a diving board while Liz says that all she wants is for that girl to find peace. Episode 3, Dis-moi oui. Diana is on the phone to therapist Susie Orbach, I think, recalling how Dodie wrote her a poem on a silver plaque after getting back from LA and breaking things off with Kelly. We know Kelly found out her wedding was not going to go ahead when she saw photos of the kiss, but this silver plaque proved really blooming elusive to me in research. So here's what I found. I saw Mohammed holding it in one of the millions and millions of interviews that he did after Dodie and Diana's deaths, where he was showing off the engagement ring and Dodie's other possessions and his flat and stuff like that. And now I can't find the blooming clip. Mohammed requested the plaque be put in Diana's coffin, but it was the Spencer family who declined, not the royal family. But there may be tea here with this plaque. So Dodie dated Tina Sinatra in the 80s, and he had admired a silver plaque poem that she owned, a gift from her former husband Richard Cohen on their wedding day, and Dodie asked to borrow it so that he could copy it and return it, and then he never returned it. Tina said it might not be the same plaque, but if he loved it enough to pass it to her, Diana, then that's very dear and it's something that she'll always wonder about. So here is what the plaque on the show says. And here is what Tina's said. Tina is being very generous to Dodie here, I feel. Back to the show. Mohammed's putting pressure on Dodie to propose to Diana and says he'll make him an equal partner in his company if he weds her. Mohammed always denied orchestrating the relationship, but I call absolute bullshit. Dodie and Diana head out to get ice cream in Monte Carlo, and Dodie talks about headlines of dump the oily love rat that are doing the rounds, based on real headlines. Indeed, here they are. They entertain the idea of going to live abroad, which Diana was actually considering at the time. Before Diana gets spotted and swamped by people asking for photos, they take shelter in a jewellery store where Dodie eyes up a ring before they are raced out of there and onto a speedboat. So there are conflicting accounts of what happened during this very brief stop in Monte Carlo and Diana's involvement or lack thereof in the choosing of this ring. But what we do know happened during Diana's time aboard the ship. Diana told a friend over the phone that if an engagement ring should be presented, it would be going firmly on the fourth finger of my right hand. So she would not be accepting the proposal. She'd be accepting the ring, but not the proposal. She told her butler Paul Burrell that she wanted to remarry like she wanted to catch a bad rash, and that is a phrase that she used quite often, actually. I want such and such like I want a bad rash. She said that several times about a few things. So I'm not saying she said it, I'm saying that's words she would use. Dodie convinced her to go for a walk in Monte Carlo on the 23rd of August, but rather than a romantic stroll with ice cream and sitting under a nice little tree, Dodie got her lost after a long pant up a hill trying to evade the paparazzi. So it was just kind of disastrous all round. Days before their accident, Diana called her sister from the ship, her sister saying, "I just did not think the relationship had much longer to go," after hanging up with Diana, and that Diana thought that Mohammed had bugged the boat, so she needed to be careful about what she said on the phone. Now this ring. I'll go into great detail on this on my The Night Diana Died video. But in a nutshell, the jewellery shop owner Rapossi says the couple visited his Monte Carlo store, picked the ring together, and Dodie asked for it to be resized by the end of August and was set to be picked up in Paris. However, Claude Roulet, Ritz Hotel official, who went out and actually purchased the ring on the night of the 31st of August when they died, testified at the inquest that he helped Dodie choose the ring at the Paris store. So, there's CCTV evidence of Dodie and this man browsing for a ring, and then they go back to the Ritz Hotel and this man goes back and purchases the ring. So I believe that more than the Monte Carlo thing. Where did the ring end up? Well, the ring was either found in the wrecked car following the crash or at Dodie's apartment in Paris, according to your sources. So it seems that if he had planned to propose that night, he was going to do it when he got back to his apartment from the Ritz, which sadly was never to happen. The ring may have been a token of affection that Diana was involved in the choosing of, but I just don't buy Rapossi's account. I just don't. I think Diana had no idea, and I think it's just as well perhaps that Dodie never had the opportunity to be let down, because according to all sources, the street's the place to go. No, according to all sources, she would have said no, and he would have been disappointed. So it's almost this kind of bittersweet thing that I don't think he ever got the chance to ask the question if he was going to. But we'll see the show take a stab at what may have played out in the final episode of part 1 if he had proposed. We will get to that. Back to the show, and Dodie tells Dad that Diana's picked out the ring from the Dis-moi Oui collection, a gold star covered in diamonds, but the ring is only in stock in Paris. But Mohammed is delighted, and Dodie convinces Diana to stop in Paris for one night on the way home to her boys. At Balmoral, Anne is worried that William is forlorn and says to Philip that at 15, Will is overdue at getting his first stag. Paparazzis swarm Diana and Dodie as they land in Paris, but Mohammed ensures they go to Villa Windsor instead of Dodie's apartment. Diana is panicking about missing a scheduled call with the boys. Mohammed offers the house for Dodie and Diana to make into their home, but the hold-up just annoys her. They did stop briefly at Villa Windsor on the way to Dodie's apartment, and no one seems really sure why. But they did stop there. Leaving, the Paps give chase on mopeds, tapping on the car windows as they get stuck in traffic. Police and security have to fight them back, and they escape to the Ritz where Diana is too late. The boys have gone out. But she didn't miss her scheduled call, and we'll discuss that in a second. So they did go to the Ritz after Villa Windsor, where Dodie does pop out at 5:40 p.m. and buy the £130,000 ring, as he's shown doing in the show. Will hunts his first stag, and Diana wraps Harry's present, a PlayStation 1. I recognise the packaging. I think I finally got mine when I was like 8 or 10. Like 2 years after it came out. I wanted it so bad. I was so jealous when my friends had it. I didn't have it. William succeeds at getting his first stag, and the paparazzi swarm again as the pair head to Dodie's apartment, where Diana finally catches the boys on the phone. Will asks if she's going to marry Dodie, and she says emphatically not. And she'll see them tomorrow night, just the three of us. They exchange love yous, and we can tell from the sad music that this is probably the last time they will ever speak to their mum. The reality is even more sad, unfortunately. So grab a tissue and strap in. In the documentary, Diana, Our Mother, Her Life and Legacy, William and Harry revealed that Diana did catch the boys on the phone, but they were having fun playing with their cousins at Balmoral and just wanted to get off the phone as quickly as possible so that they could get back to playing. William handed the phone to Harry so he could go back to the game. Harry doesn't remember what they spoke about. William does remember the last conversation with his mum, but he didn't elaborate further on what they spoke about. The rushed nature of this call and the irritation they felt at having their fun disturbed haunted the boys for a really long time after her death. Now, I looked into Will and getting his first stag too, and I couldn't find evidence that this happened at this time, nor could I find out when Will shot his first stag, but I did find Harry's recollection of his experience. So let's imagine that Will's went somewhat similarly. Harry recalls his first being when he was 15 in his book Spare. His blooding, which is an ancient rite of celebration of a hunter's first kill, was way more gruesome, with the guide pushing his head into the carcass of the red deer and insisting that he could not wipe the blood off and he had to let it dry. Dodie and Diana head out to Chez Benoit for dinner. Ensue more dangerous moped pap driving and dodging and weaving, and they have to change plans and go to the Ritz instead because there's just too many paparazzi waiting outside Chez Benoit. True, that was the case. They did have to change up their plans. The table was booked at a restaurant that night, which Dodie called up at around 9:45 p.m. to cancel. There was just too big of a crowd outside the restaurant. The Ritz restaurant goes silent and they all stare as the pair walked in, and they decide to eat upstairs instead to avoid the never-ending chaos. I believe they did actually eat in the restaurant. Turbot and sole, I believe, before heading up to the suite afterwards. But for the purposes of dramatic proposals, the show needs them in the suite at dinner time. So that's what's, that's where we're going with this. So Dodie puts on Julio Iglesias, pops out the ring and asks the question, and Diana says, "No, get up. This is madness. Sit down." Diana says she's nowhere near ready for another marriage, and he's just entangled himself from an engagement. She says marriage is a serious and painful business, and what they have is all about joy and lightness, and that Dodie needs to break free from Mohammed, and she needs to spend time with her boys, as they're the only thing that make her consistently happy. And I do believe that last part about the boys is a direct quote from her. Mohammed calls Dodie and tells him an agreement has been reached by two people tonight before hanging up on the sly, and then gives a spiel about there's no wedding and it's fine if his dad wants to cut him off for being a failure. Diana applauds, hugs and kisses him. I don't think this happened, but the fact that Diana did not want to get married and a ring was purchased had to be addressed somehow by the writers. So I'm not mad at them for putting this in, because this is hypothetically probably kind of what would have happened had they ever made it back to Dodie's apartment. They agree to stay at Dodie's flat. Trevor, the security guard and the only person who would actually survive the crash that night, advises against it as it's mad out there, but Dodie insists, saying they'll leave via a different car out the back, and Henri Poole is summoned to drive. He's at the bar, thinking he'd clocked off work for the night. As Dodie and Diana wait for their car, Dodie confesses he hung up on his dad, and Diana says she knows, and he'll find the courage soon. Back to Chad Kroger walking his dog. Will and Harry are in bed. Diana and Dodie get in the car, but the paparazzi quickly find out that they've been duped with the fake cars around the front and give chase. Diana and Dodie hold hands as the mopeds duck and dive around the car. They speed towards the bridge and bang. Now, straight up, although part one of the series deals a lot with the actual death of Diana and what happens on the night Diana dies, I'm not going to be going into great amounts of detail in this video because I started researching it and I fell down a rabbit hole. I am British. I was aware that there were conspiracy theories around the death of Princess Diana, and I never really knew what to make of it. And I just thought it was kind of a tragic accident, and I still sort of think that. I don't think it was like the establishment had her killed because she was causing too many problems. I don't think that's the case, but there's some fishy stuff that went on. Some really fishy shit, and you need to know about it if you don't already. So I have done what I do, and I have done really deep dive into it, and I have almost minute by minute CCTV of what happens until they get in the car. And then I have a speed camera because they get flashed by a speed camera. I have witness testimony. I have everything. So we're going to go through that, and that's going to get an entire video to itself because it deserves it and it warrants it. So forgive me if I gloss over a bit of that or just give the brief summary in this video, but there's no point in us going over it twice because it deserves its own video. So thanks for sticking with me as I hyper-focus on another thing. So I'll give you the absolute basics as what happened in the show. So Diana and Dodie reached the Ritz around 9:50 p.m. Henri Poole had clocked off work at 7 p.m. for the weekend, but was asked to return to the Ritz at around 10 p.m. At some point after dinner, they made their way up to the $6,000 a night Imperial Suite. By 10:20 p.m, Dodie is seen talking to the night manager, thinking up ways to leave incognito. There was a call between Mohammed and Dodie around 11:50 p.m, where Mohammed says he asked Dodie to stay the night at the Ritz and not take the risk of driving back to his apartment. But the plan was already in full swing by then, as evidenced on CCTV footage on the night. At 12:20 a.m, the ill-fated four, Diana, Dodie, the driver Henri Poole, and the bodyguard Trevor, get into the waiting Mercedes at the back of the hotel. The car is caught on a speed camera going between 61 to 63 miles per hour entering the tunnel. A chauffeur having a cigarette waiting for some of his clients on a bridge above hears the crash and calls it in. So it's not Chad Kroger, it's a chauffeur on a bridge having a cigarette, which is far more Parisian. Henri Poole and Dodie died almost instantly. By 12:32 a.m, they were both pronounced dead as a passing doctor administered aid to Diana awaiting the arrival of emergency services. She was taken to Groupe Hospitalier Petit-Salpêtrier. I hope I said that right, French viewers. But she'd suffered a catastrophic injuries and couldn't be saved, and was pronounced dead at just gone 4 a.m. on the 31st of August 1997. There is so much to get into with this event, like why it took 1 hour and 43 minutes for the ambulance to travel a few miles to get to the hospital. The 20% levels of carbon monoxide in Henri Poole's blood that meant that he shouldn't have been able to freaking stand, let alone drive a vehicle. He should have been vomiting in the hotel lobby on his knees. He shouldn't have been able to drive. The shocking inquest that the French carried out into it, but as I said, that deserves an entire episode of its own so that we can discuss the minutiae of what really happened that night. Episode 4, Aftermath. Robin Janvrin at Balmoral, Mohammed and fellows all receive the dreaded phone call. Liz and Philip are woken and told as Charles comes downstairs that Dodie died instantly, but Diana's condition is unknown. Mohammed arrives in Paris via helicopter and asks to be taken to the Pont de l'Alma, where he sees blue lights and wreckage before going to the morgue to see Dodie. At the hospital, the clock on the wall reads a few minutes past 4 a.m. and Diana hasn't made it through surgery. Fellows relays the news to a devastated Liz, Philip and Charles, who sobs uncontrollably. Charles walks around Balmoral Estate as the morning news informs the nation, and Blair proclaims his shock and sadness in a statement where he famously calls her the people's princess. Charles sits by the river and wails. On the phone to Camilla, Charles says he can't tell the boys until they wake because while they're asleep, they still have a mother. Oh, that was heartbreaking. But then proceeds to wake them and tell them anyway. Okay. William is up first, followed by the two of them telling Harry. Now, Harry does remember Charles coming and placing a hand on his knee and calling him darling boy as he broke the news. Charles asks Liz for the Queen's plane to bring Diana's body home. Philip says no because she's no longer a royal, and Charles snaps, should the mother of the future King of England instead be brought back in a Harrods van? In fact, Elizabeth, the Queen, she immediately arranged the plane. It was entirely her decision. Liz says the family must go to church as usual that morning, but the chaplain mustn't mention the accident and everything must continue to be as normal as possible. All I could find on this was that the family did go to church at Balmoral and the princess wasn't mentioned by name during the service. In Paris, Mohammed is handed the bits from Dodie's apartment, including the silver plaque poem, and believing they were engaged, says it was a love for the ages and that the tragedy will bring him and the royals together as their brother in sorrow. The boys and Charles cry throughout the church service, and Charles then kisses them goodbye and heads to Paris to collect Diana's body. He sobs audibly as he sees her in the hospital. As the escorted car brings Diana's body back to the plane, people line the streets, clapping, waving, removing their hats and paying their respects. On the flight back, Charles jokes that Paris is the biggest city in the world, and Diana brought it to an absolute standstill. Then Ghost Diana appears opposite him, and I'm laughing because Ghost Diana was really contentious, and people had very strong opinions about Ghost Diana. Some people really liked it, some people absolutely hated it. I thought it was fine, which is probably a contentious opinion in itself. To like, what, you think it was fine? You know, it's an imagining of what they would have said to Diana if they could, or what Diana would have said to them if she could, or that kind of thing. It's fine. I don't care. But feel free to weigh in the comments below. What did you think of Ghost Diana and Ghost Dudley? I don't know why I think those things are funny, but it's the uproar. It's the uproar for me. Yes, then Ghost Diana appears opposite him, thanking him for his rawness in the hospital, and she says she'll carry that with her. He says his regret will never pass before she disappears again. Diana's body is taken from the plane as it lands back in Blighty, with the Royal Standard flag draped over the top of it, and is loaded into the hearse. So, Charles did jet off almost immediately the next day to collect Diana's body and bring her home, but he was accompanied by Diana's sisters, Lady Jane Fellows, yes, she is married to Fellows, and Lady Sarah McCorquodale, which is a cracking name. Sounds like a parrot, doesn't it? A McCorquodale. Lady Sarah McCorquodale. It's a great name for a parrot. Charles did not spend time alone with Diana at the hospital, nor was he audibly heard crying. Instead, Charles and Diana's sisters went in together and spent about 10 minutes with Diana. They also arrived at the hospital with French President Jacques Chirac. And the group thanked the hospital staff for their efforts in trying to save Diana's life before travelling back together on the plane. When they landed, the Queen's Colour Squadron while waiting to move the coffin from the plane to the hearse. Liz. So cute. Charles returns to Balmoral and goes to see Liz and Philip, who are just getting off the phone with the Spencers. They tell him they've removed all TVs and radios from the place for the boys' sake. Charles says senior royals should pay more attention to the mood out there. Liz and Philip say the mood within the family is more important. Diana legally severed herself from the family, and Charles fought hard for that severance. The Spencers want a small private funeral, whilst Charles argues for a public one with all the trimmings. Outside the door, Will overhears Charles say the boys need to walk behind their mother's coffin and Liz needs to show the country some emotion. Liz and Philip say they're thinking of the boys and shouldn't be lectured on grief by the man who caused Diana the most pain. Oh. You want some aloe for that burn. So, this is just trying to make Charles look good, honestly. Liz and Philip had retained a quiet devotion for Diana since the separation and divorce, and she was always going to have some kind of send-off. Like, Liz sent the plane, Liz sent the colour squadron, Charles did not have to fight for any of that. So the plan for Diana's funeral was actually an amended version of Operation Taybridge, which was the Queen Mother's funeral plan, which they very, very hastily amended. As they had very, very little time to prepare, there were only 6 days between her death and her funeral, and according to palace insiders, including Fellows, a team of Liz's advisors worked round the clock to arrange the Westminster Abbey service, and the plans were finalised by the morning of September 1st. They decided to blend the traditional princess funeral elements like a horse-drawn gun carriage for the coffin with more modern elements that suited Diana better, like the performance by Elton John. Do you think, like, it was weird for the Queen Mother to watch, like, what had been planned for her funeral and, like, attend that? That must have been a bit weird to be like, oh, so this is what it's going to look like when I die. Back to the show, and we see Dodi's funeral, a full Muslim ceremony that Mohammed weeps throughout. Mohammed has had no word from the royals, and the silver plaque poem has been returned with no acknowledgement. Mohammed laments to Ghost Dodi. Yes, Dodi Ghost is here. Mohammed laments to the apparition of Dodi that all people care about is Diana, and Dodi replies that he shouldn't idolise the West so dang much because in Arab countries they do actually seem to care about Dodi dying. Mohammed asks his son's forgiveness for placing such high expectations on his son. Poof, Dodi Ghost, gone. Dodi's funeral was a lot more private than Diana's, but here's what we do know. Mohammed had his son's body returned to London for a private funeral service. In keeping with Islamic tradition, Dodi was buried that same day following a small private service at Regent's Park Mosque. Per an Associated Press report, Dodi's coffin arrived at the mosque shortly after nightfall, after which he was buried at Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey. He was later interred on October the 16th of the same year at the Fayed family estate 25 miles away from Brookwood in Surrey, where Mohammed then built a giant mausoleum for his son. People grieve in their own ways. On August 30th, 2023, almost exactly 26 years from the date of Dodi's death, Mohammed passed away at the age of 94, and he was buried alongside his son. Mohammed supposedly visited his son's grave every day and would sit and contemplate and talk to him, sometimes for hours, until he became too frail to do so anymore, until make the trip out to the mausoleum was in the garden. So until he became too frail to go out there and stay out there, he supposedly went and talked to him and spent time with him every day. Blair is in a cabinet meeting with Liz, Philip and Charles, listening in via conference call. And they are discussing the funeral when the news comes in that no one knows where William is. Where's William? Where's William gone? Even though he's got 24/7 security detail. And there's guards around the palace. Well, security surrounding the palace. Has anyone seen William? Sorry. I'll keep going. Everyone heads out to look for him around the estate, but he's nowhere to be found, and he arrives back soaking wet after 14 hours, as you can tell from my laughter. This is ludicrous. He had a security detail 24/7 and he couldn't have disappeared even if he wanted to. He would have had to pull a Houdini. The Balmoral estate is massive. Even if he wanted to run away, he probably would have had to run for about 3 days before he passed the border of the estate. I just find it a bit silly, but William did recount in 2021 that in the dark days of my grief that followed, I found comfort and solace in the Scottish outdoors. So I see what they were trying to do. Grief, outdoors, I see where they were trying to go, but it's really hard to lose a prince. It didn't happen. Nah. Liz debates going to London and making a statement about the family's pain. Philip says no, as TV news reports ask where the royals are and why haven't they shown up yet. Charles says to Anne the country is a sick, uncomforted child and their queen is hiding away, cold and aloof. Liz watches the news sadly as Ghost Diana makes a final appearance to her. Liz tells her she started nothing less than a revolution. And Diana says the people are looking for her for guidance on how to be British, as they always have. Poof. Ghost Diana gone. Liz tells Philip, we're going to London tomorrow. The Queen was accused of coldness after Diana's death, but they were in London 5 days later, and I really truly think she was trying to protect her grandchildren and come to terms with it all herself. I don't think she was accused of being aloof and cold and where are you, why haven't you addressed this? But I think they were just all so shocked, and I think she really was trying to protect the boys. Blair lobbied Liz to move away from her stiff upper lip protocol in the days after Diana's death. However, Liz did break protocol in a couple of ways with Diana's funeral. Firstly, she did so by flying the Union Jack at half-mast over Buckingham Palace on the day of the funeral. Now, normally the way the flags work at Buckingham Palace is if the monarch is in residence, the flag is raised. If the monarch is not in residence, the flag is lowered. So the flag is never at half-mast. But this was done on the day of Diana's funeral, and it was also done on the 1-year anniversary of Diana's funeral. It's been done since, but it was never done before Diana's funeral. The Queen also broke protocol by bowing her head when Diana's coffin came past in the hearse, and that is seen as a sign of deference to someone of a higher rank. And there is no higher rank than that of the Queen. So that was sort of the utmost respectful gesture that the Queen could have given her. And if you watch the video, I can't include it because someone will copyright strike me. But if you watch the video, you will see that Princess Margaret, she's standing with Princess Margaret. Margaret does not bow her head. The Queen does. It was a big deal. It really was a big deal. Back to the show, Liz gives her speech on the inside of the balcony at Buckingham Palace as real footage of mourners plays interspersed with the boys thanking the public who have come out in droves to offer their condolences. And the following day we have Diana's funeral, where her coffin is carried on a horse-drawn gun carriage to Westminster Abbey, draped in the royal standard flag, a card to Mummy, which was written by Harry, taking front and centre on top of the coffin. Crowds lined the streets to pay their respects as the two boys, along with Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, Charles and Philip, all walk behind the coffin. Philip tells Will not to look up and to concentrate on each step. When asked why people are crying for someone they've never met, Philip replies, "They're crying for you." And I think this is a nod to the boys both having stated in interviews that they felt very guilty that they weren't expressing very much emotion at the time because they were just so shocked, and yet they saw the general public weeping and crying, and they saw this enormous outpouring of grief, and yet they were so stunned they were unable to cry. Charles Spencer described that walk behind his sister Diana's coffin as the most horrifying half hour of my life. William said in a 2017 BBC interview that it was one of the most difficult moments of his life too, but there's a balance between duty and family, and that's what we had to do, insisting that the decision for the boys to walk behind the coffin was made as a collective consensus as a family, and that is the answer of a future king, everybody, as opposed to an earl. Earl Spencer spoke at Diana's funeral service, famously saying that it was really ironic that someone named after the goddess of the hunt had become the most hunted woman of the modern age. Charles broke protocol too by not wearing a black suit. He actually wore a navy suit, which was Diana's favourite that he owned. So that's kind of cute, huh? Approximately 2,000 people were invited to the service at Westminster Abbey, including royals, state dignitaries, including then First Lady Hillary Clinton, Bernadette Chirac, Tony and Cherie Blair, and 4 former Prime Ministers, and Blair did a reading at the funeral. A-listers attended too, such as Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, Pavarotti, and of course Elton John, who would perform his song Candle in the Wind. This song was officially released in September 1997 and became the best-selling song, not just of 1997, but of all time in the UK. Still, to this day, apparently, which is weird, because I feel like I haven't heard it since about 1999. But apparently that's true. So, okay. Diana was then taken from Westminster Abbey and taken to the Spencer family estate at Althorpe, where she was interred in a very private family funeral. She was buried on an island in the middle of a lake in the grounds, surrounded by trees that Diana and members of her family had planted. And she was buried amongst her family pets, including her cat Marmalade. Harry recalls the moment his mother's coffin was lowered into the ground at Althorpe as the only time he truly cried during that period and for a long time after. Heartbreakingly, in a 60 Minutes interview, he confided that for many, many years, he thought Diana had faked her own death to escape all the public scrutiny, and that any day now she would call and tell him and William where to meet her and they could all be together, and that him and William talked about that a lot, especially in the year after her death. And that is just, oh, I'm sure we'll touch way more on how the boys coped with their grief and moved forward in part 2. So, to see us out, I'd like to actually talk about the things Diana did and achieved in 1997 before her death, because I feel like, stuff was touched upon, but she did some pretty cool stuff in 1997 alone, and all we're focusing on is her death. So I'm going to talk about what she got up to in the 8 months of 1997 before she died. So the famous landmine walk actually happened in Angola on the 15th of January 1997. Anti-personnel landmines have been in widespread use for decades before they were banned in late 1997. And by the mid-90s, they were maiming and killing so many people around the globe every day. The problem was being labelled as an epidemic. As we know, 20 days before her death, Diana was in Bosnia visiting cemeteries and comforting survivors and families of victims and meeting with rehabilitation specialists. Diana's involvement was undeniably influential to the Ottawa Mine Treaty, which banned the use, production, sale, stockpiling and transfer of mines, being signed by 122 states on the 3rd of September 1997. She was integral. Although she never lived to see the treaty signed, she was integral in bringing awareness to it and making it happen, as well as helping to ban landmines in just 1 year. In 1997, Diana also did all of the following things. On March the 9th, she attended William's Church of England confirmation with the rest of the royal family, perfectly amicably. On March the 17th, she visited Nelson Mandela in his house in South Africa. On May the 22nd, she went to Lahore in Pakistan, which was her final visit to a beloved destination, and she was greeted by Jemima Khan and her new baby. Diana was there to help raise funds for a hospital that Jemima's husband, cricketer Imran Khan, had helped build. June the 3rd, we have the Swan Lake Gala, the Royal Albert Hall, and the meal with Mohammed and Heine. June the 18th, she visited the White House on behalf of the Red Cross and met Hillary Clinton. This is crazy that this wasn't in there. So on June 25th at Christie's in New York, she auctioned off a load of her old clothes for charity. This had been William's idea after she'd opened her closet one day and said, I've just got too many clothes that I'm not going to wear that now that I'm no longer a royal. And he said, why don't you sell them off for charity? And she said, great idea, kiddo. Something like that is what she said. She said yes. Anyway, the revenge dress alone sold for $74,000, and the dress she wore to dance with John Travolta netted a staggering $225,000. In total, more than $3.27 million was raised for AIDS Trust and the Royal Marsden Cancer Fund. Why are we not talking about that? Why are we not talking about that 2 months before her death? 3.27 million. We need to focus on that. June the 30th, she graced the cover of Vanity Fair, and July the 1st, she held her 36th birthday party at the Tate Gallery in London, and then on July the 11th, she sets off to Saint-Tropez. On the 22nd of July, we have her friend Gianni Versace's memorial service in Milan, where she caught up with Elton John. And her last official engagement is August the 10th, Sarajevo in Bosnia. So that's what she got up to in 1997. But let's all focus on the night she died. I mean, I'm making a video about it, so I can't really talk. But landmines, $3.27 million. Come on. Woman was an icon. On the 20th anniversary of Diana's death, a special memorial garden was created for her at Kensington Palace, and a statue of her and the boys as children was unveiled. Speaking in the documentary, Diana, Our Mother, Her Life and Legacy, William said he tells his children about Granny Diana every night at bedtime, and that Diana would have been a nightmare grandmother, breezing in at bath time, making a mess, bubbles everywhere, causing a scene and then scampering off. She would have loved it. And from the pure joy she had on her face in the photos of her with her boys doing everyday stuff like going to theme parks, one cannot fail to disagree. So that is it for season 6 part 1 of The Crown, this historian's reaction. Part 2 will be coming soon, as well as the everything that happened on the night Diana died, and you can make up your own mind whether it's fishy video. It's fishy. If you liked this video, please leave a like below. If you appreciate the research that I put into this video, please leave a like below. If you didn't like it, that's okay. You can dislike it too. And please weigh down in the comments below, what did you think of Ghost Diana and Ghost Dodie, and what do you want to hear this historian react to next? You can hit me up in the comment section below, or you can get in touch with me on my socials. Handles are around. I think we're at the Herstory channel on pretty much everything. So that is it. Thank you very much for joining me for part 1 of season 6 of The Crown. And I will see you again very soon for part 2, and also the night Diana died breakdown. But until then, be kind, pet all of the dogs, and random acts of kindness. I've said be kind twice. That's nerdy. But until then, be kind, pet all the dogs and the cats. And smile, because you look pretty when you smile. I will see you next time. Bye, 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 bye.